The unexpected encounter. The planet Orvian 9 was nothing more than a wasteland now. Once a thriving world with towering alien cities and lush green forests, it had been reduced to ruins by years of war. The air was heavy with the scent of burning metal, and the skies were a constant shade of ash gray. Commander Ethan Blake moved cautiously through the rubble, his combat boots crunching over broken glass and charred remains of alien machinery. Ethan wasn't supposed to be here. His orders were clear: scout for survivors and report back. But Ethan wasn't the kind of soldier who could turn away from those in need. His sharp green eyes scanned the horizon as his rifle remained steady in his hands. Something had drawn him deeper into the ruins, a faint signal from a downed ship nearby. As he approached the wreckage, his instincts screamed at him to stay alert. The ship's sleek design was unlike anything he had seen before. Its metallic surface shimmered with a faint blue glow, even in the dim light. This wasn't a human ship. It belonged to the Xyrans, an alien race known for their advanced technology and unmatched beauty. But the Xyrans were also known for their distrust of humans. Ethan stepped inside cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the hollow corridors of the broken vessel. The air was thick and stale, but he pressed on, guided by the faint sound of static coming from a nearby chamber. His heart raced as he pushed open the door. There she was, a young Xyran woman, barely clinging to life, lay against the wall. Her silver hair was tangled and streaked with blood, her delicate skin marred by cuts and bruises. She wore an ornate dress, now torn and dirty, that shimmered faintly even in the dim light. A small crown rested lopsided on her head. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just any Xyran. She was royalty. The woman's violet eyes fluttered open, filled with fear and suspicion as they locked onto Ethan. Her voice was weak but sharp. "Stay back, human." Ethan knelt, setting his rifle aside and raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said calmly. "I'm here to help." She didn't seem convinced. Her hand tightened around a small blade-like device she had been clutching. It wasn't much of a weapon, but the determination in her gaze made Ethan pause. "You'll die if you stay here," Ethan continued, keeping his voice steady. "Your enemies will come back. Let me get you out of here." The woman hesitated, her eyes flickering between Ethan and the open doorway behind him. The sound of distant drones hummed through the air, growing louder with each passing second. She knew he was right. She wouldn't last long in her condition, and the enemy wouldn't show her mercy. "I am Princess Lyra of the Xyran Empire," she said finally, her voice trembling but firm. "If you betray me, human, I will not hesitate to end you." Ethan allowed himself a small, wry smile. "Noted, Your Highness." He gently helped her to her feet, noticing how light she felt in his arms. Xyrans were delicate compared to humans, but there was a quiet strength in her that Ethan couldn't ignore. He supported her as they made their way out of the wreckage, his senses on high alert. Outside, the ruined city stretched endlessly in all directions. The distant hum of drones was growing louder now, echoing off the broken walls. Ethan's mind raced. They needed to move fast, but Lyra's condition was worse than he'd thought. Her breathing was shallow, and she leaned heavily against him. "We need to find cover," he said, scanning the area. His gaze fell on a collapsed building nearby. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. "Hang on." As they reached the building, Ethan set Lyra down gently against a wall. She winced, her hand clutching her side. Blood seeped through her dress, staining the fabric. Ethan cursed under his breath. He wasn't a medic, but he couldn't just leave her like this. "You're hurt," he said. "Let me take a look." Lyra shook her head weakly. "I don't trust you." "You don't have to," Ethan replied, his voice firm. "But if I don't help you, you're not going to make it." Reluctantly, she let him examine the wound. It was a deep gash across her ribs, likely from shrapnel during the crash. Ethan worked quickly, using a medkit from his pack to clean and bandage the wound. Lyra watched him closely, her eyes filled with both pain and curiosity. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. Your kind has no reason to care about mine. Ethan didn't look up as he worked. I don't leave people behind, he said simply. Before Lara could respond, a sharp whirring sound filled the air. Ethan's head snapped up. The drones were close, too close. He grabbed his rifle and pulled Lara to her feet. They found us, he said. We need to move. Now. Lara nodded, her fear masked by a growing determination. Together, they slipped into the shadows of the ruined city, the sound of enemy drones closing in behind them. Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle as he led the way, his mind focused on one goal: survival. For both of them. The hunter becomes the hunted. The once muted hum of distant drones had grown into a menacing roar, echoing through the desolate ruins of Orvian 9. Commander Ethan Blake's grip on his rifle tightened as he led Princess Lara through the maze of collapsed buildings and jagged debris. Each step they took felt like a countdown to confrontation. The oppressive silence between them was broken only by Lara's labored breathing and the faint rustle of her tattered gown against the ground. Ethan stole a glance over his shoulder. The Zyran princess moved with surprising resilience for someone so badly injured. Her silver hair shimmered faintly under the ash-filled sky, and her violet eyes burned with determination. Despite her fragile frame, she radiated an air of quiet defiance. Ethan admired her resolve, but knew it wouldn't be enough to keep them alive. The shadowy figure they had spotted earlier lingered in Ethan's mind. He had seen many things during his years as a soldier, but this was different. Whoever, or whatever it was, they moved with precision and purpose, unlike the mindless drones that patrolled the area. Ethan's instincts screamed danger. We're being followed, Lara said suddenly, her voice low but steady. Ethan glanced at her, surprised. You noticed. I may be injured, but I'm not blind, she replied, clutching her side where Ethan had hastily bandaged her wound. Whoever it is, they're skilled. Too skilled. Voidstalker, Ethan muttered grimly. Lara's eyes widened slightly. The Voidstalker. That's a myth. Not anymore, Ethan said. They're elite bounty hunters. Ruthless, relentless, and expensive. If one's after you, it means someone really wants you dead. Lara's expression hardened. Then we don't have time to waste. The princess's resilience impressed Ethan, but he couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over him. He scanned the horizon, his soldiers' instincts calculating their options. The ruins offered some cover, but they were also a labyrinth that could easily trap them. Staying in one place was a death sentence. We need to draw them out, Ethan said, his voice low and decisive. Lara raised an eyebrow. Draw them out. That sounds suicidal. Ethan smirked faintly. It's only suicidal if we don't have a plan. They reached an abandoned structure that might have once been a marketplace. Broken stalls and overturned tables littered the area, providing plenty of places to hide. Ethan motioned for Lara to take cover behind a large rusted pillar. He crouched nearby, his rifle trained on the open courtyard. Minutes felt like hours as they waited. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the silence. Lara's breathing was shallow but steady. Ethan could feel her eyes on him, studying him, questioning his motives. He didn't have time to explain himself. All that mattered now was survival. A sudden ripple in the air caught Ethan's attention. He shifted his gaze, his finger hovering over the trigger. There, a flicker of movement in the shadows. Whoever was following them was skilled, but not invisible. The Voidstalker emerged from the gloom like a phantom, their sleek black armor blending seamlessly with the ruins. A crimson visor covered their face, and a long curved blade hung at their side. They moved with a predator's grace, each step deliberate and silent. Ethan's heart pounded, but his focus remained unshaken. He waited, his breathing steady, until the Voidstalker stepped fully into the courtyard. Then, with a sharp inhale, he pulled the trigger. The energy bolt from Ethan's rifle sliced through the air, striking the ground inches from the Voidstalker. It was a warning shot, meant to draw attention, not to kill. The Void Stalker froze, their head tilting slightly as if amused. Ethan stepped into the open, his rifle trained on the bounty hunter. "I don't know who sent you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But if you're looking for a fight, you've found one." The Void Stalker didn't respond. Instead, they drew their blade in one fluid motion, the weapon humming with deadly energy. Ethan barely had time to react before the hunter lunged, their movements impossibly fast. Ethan rolled to the side, firing a series of quick shots. The Void Stalker dodged with ease, their blades slicing through the air where Ethan had been moments before. It was clear this wasn't just a hired gun. This was a master of their craft. From her hiding spot, Lyra watched the battle with wide eyes. Despite her injuries, she reached for the small blade she had kept hidden. She knew she was no match for the Void Stalker. But she couldn't sit idly by while Ethan fought alone. Ethan ducked behind a fallen beam, reloading his rifle as the Void Stalker closed in. "Any bright ideas, Your Highness?" he called out, his tone laced with grim humor. Lyra emerged from her hiding place, her blade held tightly in her hand. "Just one," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Don't die." With surprising agility, Lyra flung her blade toward the Void Stalker. The weapon struck their shoulder, causing a brief flicker in their armor's energy shield. It wasn't enough to wound them, but it provided Ethan with an opening. Seizing the moment, Ethan fired a precise shot at the Void Stalker's visor. The impact sent the hunter stumbling backward, their blade clattering to the ground. Ethan didn't wait for them to recover. He grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her toward the shadows. "Run," he shouted. They sprinted through the ruins, the sound of the Void Stalker's pursuit echoing behind them. Despite the chaos, Ethan couldn't help but admire Lyra's courage. She wasn't just a princess, she was a fighter. As they disappeared into the labyrinth of rubble, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The Void Stalker wouldn't stop until their mission was complete. But Ethan had faced impossible odds before, and he wasn't about to give up now. The hunter had become the hunted, but Ethan was ready for the fight of his life. The warrior's pledge. The cold wind of Orvian 9 whistled through the broken remains of an ancient Zyran temple, its towering pillars now reduced to jagged stumps that cast long shadows in the pale light of the distant twin suns. Ethan and Lyra had taken refuge here, deep within the labyrinthine ruins. The Void Stalker's relentless pursuit had paused for now, but Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before they caught up again. Ethan sat near a crumbling wall, his rifle resting across his knees as he kept watch. Lyra, still weak from her injuries, leaned against a stone column, her violet eyes fixed on the distant horizon. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the occasional crackle of rubble shifting in the wind. "You're thinking too loud," Ethan said without looking at her. Lyra blinked, startled out of her thoughts. "Excuse me." Ethan glanced at her, a faint smirk on his face. "You've been staring into space for the last 15 minutes. Whatever's on your mind, it's practically screaming." Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't used to being read so easily, especially by a human. "You risked your life back there," she said finally, her voice soft but edged with curiosity. "You don't even know me." Ethan shrugged. "Didn't have much of a choice, did I? Letting you die wasn't an option." "That's not what I meant," Lyra said, her tone sharpening. "You're a soldier, a human soldier. My people don't trust yours, and from what I've seen, your kind feels the same about us. So why?" Ethan leaned back against the wall, his expression thoughtful. "I guess I don't see it that way. Doesn't matter where you're from or what you are. If someone's in trouble, you help them. That's just how I was raised." Lyra's gaze softened, but her pride wouldn't let her show it. Instead, she shifted uncomfortably, wincing as the pain in her side flared up again. Ethan noticed immediately. "Let me take a look," he said, moving toward her. "I can manage," Lyra replied, her voice stubborn. "Yeah, clearly," Ethan said dryly, kneeling beside her. "You've been managing so well, you've barely stayed upright since we left the crash site." Liara glared at him, but didn't protest as he carefully examined the bandage he had hastily applied earlier. The wound was worse than he'd realized. Blood had seeped through the cloth, and her skin was pale and clammy. "You need proper medical attention," Ethan said, frowning. "If we don't stop the bleeding, you're not going to make it." Liara's jaw tightened. "There's no time. The Void Stalker is out there. We have to keep moving." Ethan's expression hardened. "Listen to me, Princess. You're not going to outrun anyone in this condition. If we don't take care of this now, you'll bleed out before they even catch us." The weight of his words hung in the air. Liara hated feeling vulnerable, but she knew he was right. She gave a small nod, and Ethan went to work, his hand steady as he cleaned and rebandaged the wound using supplies from his pack. As he worked, Liara watched him closely. There was something about Ethan that intrigued her, a quiet strength, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere duty. He wasn't like the other humans she had encountered during the war. He didn't carry the same bitterness or prejudice. He seemed different. "You're not like the others," she said quietly. Ethan glanced at her. "Others?" "Other humans," Liara clarified. "The ones who came to my world, who treated my people like trophies to be conquered." Ethan sighed, tying off the bandage. "I won't defend what they did. War brings out the worst in everyone. But not all of us are like that." Liara nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "My father used to say the same. He believed there were humans who could be allies, who could be friends." Her voice faltered, and she looked away. Ethan didn't press her. He could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of loss she carried. Instead, he stood and extended a hand to her. "Come on. We need to find better shelter before nightfall." Liara hesitated, then took his hand. His grip was firm and steady, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. Together, they ventured deeper into the ruins, the fading light casting long shadows across the crumbled stones. As they walked, Ethan's mind raced. He had seen countless battles, faced impossible odds, but this felt different. Protecting Liara wasn't just about survival, it was about something bigger. She was more than just a princess. She was a symbol of hope for her people, a chance to end the war that had ravaged both their worlds. "Ethan," Liara said suddenly, breaking the silence. He turned to look at her. "Yeah." "If we don't make it out of this," she began, her voice hesitant, "I want you to know, I'm grateful for everything." Ethan smiled faintly. "We're not dead yet, Princess. Save your gratitude for when we make it out alive." Liara allowed herself a small smile, but the moment was short-lived. A faint whirring sound reached their ears, growing louder with each passing second. Ethan's expression darkened. "They found us," he said, his voice low. Liara's hand tightened around the hilt of her blade. "What now?" Ethan's eyes scanned their surroundings, searching for an advantage. "We make a stand," he said firmly. "No more running." As the sound of approaching drones filled the air, Ethan raised his rifle, his jaw set with determination. Liara stood beside him, her blade ready. In that moment, they weren't just a human soldier and an alien princess. They were survivors, united by a shared purpose. Whatever came next, they would face it together, the enemy within. The air inside the abandoned Zyran outpost was stale, thick with dust, and the faint metallic tang of long-forgotten technology. Ethan and Liara had taken shelter in what appeared to have once been a control room. Broken consoles and shattered screens surrounded them, remnants of a time when this place might have been bustling with life. Now it was just another ruin, a fragile sanctuary in a hostile world. Ethan knelt by the doorway, his rifle at the ready, scanning the dim corridor beyond for any sign of movement. Liara sat against the wall, her face pale but determined. Her wound was healing slowly, thanks to Ethan's field medicine, but she was far from recovered. "This place feels wrong," Liara murmured, breaking the silence. Ethan glanced at her. "Wrong how?" Lyra's eyes flickered to the shadows that seemed to cling to the corners of the room. It's too quiet. My people wouldn't have abandoned an outpost like this without a fight. Something happened here. Ethan nodded. He felt it too, a subtle but undeniable tension in the air, like the entire building was holding its breath. But they had no choice. They needed rest, and this was the safest place they'd found so far. We'll stay long enough for you to regain your strength, Ethan said. Then we move. Lyra's gaze lingered on him. You keep saying that, but what about you? You've been running, fighting, and taking care of me without a moment to rest. How much longer do you think you can keep this up? Ethan smirked faintly. Long enough. Before Lyra could respond, a faint sound echoed through the corridor. Metallic footsteps, slow and deliberate. Ethan's smirk vanished as he motioned for Lyra to stay quiet. He moved silently to the doorway, peering into the shadows. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a low hum that set his nerves on edge. Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened. It wasn't the Void Stalker. This was something else. Suddenly, a figure stepped into the light. It was humanoid but unmistakably mechanical, its body composed of sleek, black metal with glowing blue lines tracing intricate patterns across its surface. Its eyes were cold, unblinking orbs of light. A sentinel, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan glanced back at her. Friend or foe? Foe, she replied grimly. They were designed to guard Zarin technology, but they don't differentiate between friend and enemy anymore. Something corrupted their programming. Ethan swore under his breath. He had fought machines before, but this one looked like it could be trouble. The sentinel turned its head slowly, scanning the room. Ethan knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. Stay low, he whispered to Lyra. I'll draw its attention. Before she could protest, Ethan stepped into the open, raising his rifle. The sentinel's glowing eyes locked onto him instantly, and it let out a mechanical growl, a sound that sent shivers down his spine. Hey, over here, Ethan shouted, firing a warning shot at the sentinel's feet. The bullet sparked against the metal floor, and the machine charged, its movements eerily smooth and fast. Ethan fired a series of precise shots, aiming for what he hoped were its weak points. The sentinel dodged with surprising agility, closing the distance between them in seconds. Ethan barely managed to dive out of the way as the machine's arm transformed into a blade, slashing through the air where he had been standing. Ethan, Lyra's voice rang out, and he turned to see her standing, her blade in hand. Stay back, Ethan shouted, dodging another strike from the sentinel. You're not strong enough to fight right now. Lyra's expression was defiant, but she obeyed, retreating to a safer position. Ethan focused on the sentinel, his mind racing. Its movements were too fast for him to predict, and his bullets barely seemed to dent its armor. Think, Ethan. There's always a way. His eyes darted around the room, landing on a broken console with exposed wiring. An idea formed in his mind. He needed to lure the sentinel closer to it, but that would mean putting himself in even greater danger. Come on, you tin can, Ethan taunted, backing toward the console. The sentinel followed, its blade glinting ominously in the dim light. When he was close enough, Ethan grabbed a loose wire and yanked it free. Sparks flew as he swung the wire toward the sentinel, the exposed metal connecting with its chassis. The machine convulsed, electricity coursing through its body, and let out a distorted screech before collapsing to the ground. Ethan didn't wait to see if it would get back up. He grabbed Lyra's arm. We need to move. Now. As they hurried through the corridors, Lyra looked up at him, her expression a mix of awe and frustration. You're insane, you know that. Ethan grinned despite the tension. I've been told. They emerged into what looked like a storage room, shelves lined with crates covered in Zarin script. Lyra's eyes lit up as she recognized the symbols. This is a medical cache. Ethan watched as she opened one of the crates, revealing vials of glowing liquid. She took one and injected it into her arm without hesitation. Almost immediately, Color returned to her cheeks, and her breathing steadied. "That's more like it," Lyra said, standing taller. But their moment of relief was short-lived. The sound of footsteps echoed again, louder this time. Ethan's stomach sank as he realized the sentinel wasn't alone. "They're coming," he said, readying his rifle. Lyra gripped her blade, her renewed strength giving her confidence. "Then we fight." Ethan nodded. They had come too far to give up now. Together, they prepared to face whatever came next, knowing that the true enemy wasn't just the machines. It was the fear and doubt that threatened to consume them, and they wouldn't let it win. The sacrifice. The Zyran night was unnervingly quiet. The once vibrant world seemed to hold its breath, watching as Ethan and Lyra moved carefully through the ruins of what had once been a great city. The faint glow of distant stars barely illuminated their path, and the oppressive darkness seemed alive, ready to swallow them whole. Ethan's every step was calculated, his rifle held tightly in his hands. He glanced back at Lyra, who walked just behind him. Her violet eyes were sharp and alert, her posture no longer weak. The medical serum she had injected earlier had revitalized her, and while her physical wounds were healing, the emotional weight of their journey remained evident in the tension of her movements. "We're heading into open ground," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll be exposed." Lyra nodded. "We have no choice. If we stay in the ruins, we'll be cornered." The Voidstalker was out there. Ethan knew it, and so did Lyra. The relentless hunter had been trailing them for days, always just out of sight, but never far enough to offer a moment's peace. It was only a matter of time before the hunter struck again. They reached the edge of the ruins, where the broken city gave way to a barren expanse of rocky terrain. Ethan stopped, scanning the area with his thermal scope. The landscape stretched endlessly before them, offering no cover. It was the perfect killing ground. "Not ideal," Ethan muttered. "Do we have another option?" Lyra asked, stepping up beside him. Ethan hesitated. The answer was no, but he didn't want to admit it. "If we're going to cross, we need to move fast. The Voidstalker will see us the moment we step out." Lyra's jaw tightened. "Then let's make sure it's not that easy for them." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Got a plan?" Lyra reached into her pack and pulled out a small spherical device. "This is a Zyran disruptor. It'll create a temporary electromagnetic pulse. It won't last long, but it should disable their tracking equipment." Ethan took the device, studying it. Handy. But if it doesn't work? Lyra met his gaze. "We'll improvise." Ethan smirked faintly. "I'm starting to like your style, Princess." They made their move, sprinting across the rocky terrain as the disruptor activated. A pulse of energy rippled through the air, momentarily disrupting the faint hum of the drones that had been circling above. For a few precious minutes, they were invisible. Ethan's boots pounded against the ground, his senses on high alert. Lyra kept pace beside him, her blade at the ready. The barren landscape offered no solace, but they pressed on, knowing hesitation could cost them their lives. Then it happened. A deafening roar shattered the silence as a sleek black ship descended from the sky, its engines kicking up clouds of dust and debris. Ethan skidded to a halt, raising his rifle as the Voidstalker emerged, their crimson visor gleaming ominously in the faint starlight. "Run," Ethan shouted, pushing Lyra forward. But Lyra didn't move. Her gaze was locked on the Voidstalker, her expression a mix of fear and defiance. "I'm not leaving you." "Lyra, go," Ethan barked, his tone commanding. "You're the only one who can end this war. Don't let them win." Before she could argue, the Voidstalker charged. Ethan fired a volley of shots, each one expertly aimed, but the hunter moved with inhuman speed, dodging effortlessly. The blade in their hand glinted as they closed the distance. Ethan met the Voidstalker head-on, his rifle switching to melee mode as he blocked the first strike. Sparks flew as metal clashed against metal. The Voidstalker's strength was overwhelming, but Ethan held his ground, his muscles straining against the force of the attack. "Ethan," Lyra shouted, stepping forward. "Stay back," Ethan yelled, parrying another strike. "Get out of here." Lyra hesitated, her heart pounding. She couldn't abandon him, but she knew he was right. Her people needed her. The war needed her, but leaving Ethan felt like a betrayal. The Voidstalker swung their blade in a wide arc, forcing Ethan to dive to the side. He rolled to his feet, firing a burst of shots that forced the hunter back. His breath came in ragged gasps, but his resolve never wavered. "You're not taking her," Ethan growled, his voice filled with unyielding determination. The Voidstalker tilted their head, as if amused. Then, without warning, they activated a small device on their wrist. A swarm of drones descended from the sky, their weapons locking onto Ethan and Lyra. Ethan's mind raced. There was no way they could fight them all. His eyes darted to Lyra, who was clutching the disruptor in her hand. "Throw it," Ethan shouted. Lyra hesitated, then hurled the device toward the Voidstalker. The disruptor activated midair, sending out another pulse of energy. The drones faltered, their systems momentarily disabled. "Go," Ethan shouted, charging toward the Voidstalker to buy her time. Lyra's heart twisted as she turned and ran, her legs carrying her away from the chaos. She didn't want to leave him, but she knew she had to. Tears blurred her vision as she heard the sounds of battle behind her. The clash of weapons, the roar of the Voidstalker, and Ethan's defiant shouts. Ethan fought with everything he had, his body pushed to its limits. He knew he couldn't win, but that didn't matter. All that mattered was giving Lyra a chance to escape. His rifle's energy core overheated, forcing him to switch to close combat. The Voidstalker's strikes were relentless, each one bringing him closer to the edge. As the Voidstalker raised their blade for the final strike, Ethan managed a faint smile. Not today. With a final surge of strength, Ethan activated the explosive core of his rifle, unleashing a blinding burst of energy that engulfed the area. The Voidstalker staggered, their systems temporarily overloaded. In the distance, Lyra paused, tears streaming down her face as the light from the explosion lit up the sky. She clenched her fists, her heart heavy with guilt and gratitude. Ethan had sacrificed himself so she could live, so she could finish what they had started. "I won't let your sacrifice be in vain," she whispered, her voice filled with resolve. With renewed determination, Lyra turned and disappeared into the night, leaving behind the man who had become her protector, her friend, and her hope. The secret weapon. The barren wasteland stretched endlessly before Lyra, its jagged terrain illuminated by the dim, pale light of Orvian 9's twin moons. The echoes of the battle she had left behind still haunted her, but she forced herself to keep moving. Ethan's sacrifice had bought her time. Precious, fleeting time. But the weight of his final stand pressed heavily on her heart. Every step felt like an act of defiance against the despair threatening to consume her. Ahead, a dark structure rose from the rocky landscape, its silhouette jagged and ominous against the moonlit sky. This was her destination, an ancient Zyran vault hidden deep within the planet's crust. Inside lay the weapon her people had entrusted to her family's lineage, a weapon powerful enough to end the war. But its existence came with a grim truth. It was a weapon that could just as easily destroy as it could save. Lyra hesitated at the entrance. The vault's metallic doors were covered in intricate Zyran glyphs, their meaning lost to most except her. Her fingers traced the symbols, her mind racing with the stories her father had told her as a child. Stories of a power so great it was said to rival the stars themselves. Taking a deep breath, she pressed her hand against the central glyph. The metal beneath her fingers pulsed faintly before the doors slid open with a low groan, revealing a narrow corridor bathed in cold blue light. Lyra stepped inside, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. Deep within the vault, the room holding the weapon was unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. Towering columns of crystalline energy spiraled upward, pulsating with a rhythmic hum. At the center of the room rested a spherical device encased in a protective field. Its surface shimmered with shifting patterns of light, almost alive, as if it sensed her presence. "The Starfire core," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. Her father's warnings echoed in her mind. "This is not a weapon of victory, but of desperation. Use it wisely, or it will consume everything." She approached the core cautiously, her heart pounding. The Zyran glyphs etched into its base glowed faintly, their meaning clear to her trained eyes. "Choose wisely, for the balance of life depends on your will." But before she could deactivate the field, a sharp sound behind her froze her in place, a faint hiss of hydraulics, followed by the distinct hum of approaching footsteps. Lyra spun around, her blade drawn, only to face a figure stepping out of the shadows. "You're not alone," the figure said, their voice low and gravelly. It wasn't the Voidstalker. It was a Zyran rebel, their armor battered and scorched, their face hidden behind a cracked visor. "Who are you?" Lyra demanded, keeping her blade raised. The rebel removed their helmet, revealing a scared but determined face. "Name's Kel. I was sent by the Resistance. We've been tracking your signal." Lyra narrowed her eyes. "The Resistance? How do I know you're not working for the Voidstalker?" Kale raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "You don't. But I'm here to help. I know what you're trying to do, and I know what that weapon is capable of." Lyra's grip on her blade tightened. "Then you know I can't let it fall into the wrong hands." "That's why I'm here," Kale said, stepping closer. "You can't activate the Starfire core alone. It requires two bearers, one to unlock the weapon, and the other to stabilize its energy. Without stabilization, it'll detonate and take out half the galaxy." Lyra's heart sank. She hadn't known this part of the weapon's design. "And you're saying you're the one to help me?" Kale nodded. "I'm saying we don't have much time. The Voidstalker will be here soon, and if they get their hands on the core, it's over. For all of us." Lyra hesitated, her mind racing. She didn't trust Kale, but his words rang true. She didn't have a choice. "Fine," she said. "But if you betray me, I'll make sure you don't live long enough to regret it." Kale smirked faintly. "Fair enough." Together, Lyra and Kale worked to deactivate the protective field surrounding the Starfire core. The process was intricate, requiring Lyra to recite ancient Zyran incantations while Kale manipulated the glyph panels on the base of the core. The room thrummed with energy as the field flickered, then dissipated. The moment the core was exposed, its light grew brighter, casting the room in an otherworldly glow. Lyra reached out, her fingers brushing against its surface. The core felt warm and alive, pulsing in sync with her heartbeat. "Now what?" she asked, glancing at Kale. "Now we stabilize it," Kale said, stepping forward. He placed his hands on the core opposite Lyra's, his face tense with concentration. "But once we do, we'll only have a short window to use it before the Voidstalker tracks the energy signature." As they began the stabilization process, the room trembled. The core's light intensified, and Lyra felt a surge of energy coursing through her, connecting her to something vast and incomprehensible. Images flashed in her mind, her people's suffering, the destruction of her homeworld, Ethan's sacrifice. "This is it," she murmured, her voice filled with both awe and dread. "This is what my father wanted to protect." Kale nodded grimly. "Let's make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain." But before they could complete the process, a deafening crash shook the vault. The Voidstalker had arrived, their crimson visor glowing like a malevolent beacon in the darkness. Lyra's heart pounded as she stepped back from the core, her blade ready. Kale drew his weapon, positioning himself between her and the Voidstalker. "Keep stabilizing the core," Kale shouted. "I'll hold them off." Lyra hesitated, torn between helping him and finishing what they had started. But she knew the truth. The core was their only chance. With a deep breath, she refocused on the glyphs, her hands trembling as she worked to complete the stabilization process. Kale fought valiantly, his movements swift and precise. But the Void Stalker was relentless. Their blade clashed against his, sparks flying with each strike. Liara risked a glance at the battle, her heart sinking as Kel was forced to his knees. "Liara," Kel shouted, his voice strained. "Finish it." With a surge of determination, Liara activated the final glyph. The Starfire core surged with energy, its light engulfing the room. The Void Stalker paused, their head tilting as if in recognition of the power before them. Liara stepped forward, the core's energy radiating through her. "This ends now." The room erupted in light as Liara unleashed the core's power, determined to protect her people and honor the sacrifices that had brought her to this moment. Tears of gratitude. The Starfire core pulsed with a radiance that lit the chamber like a second sun, its immense energy coursing through Liara's body. She stood in the heart of the ancient vault, her hands resting on the shimmering orb. Its power was overwhelming, yet strangely calming, as though it recognized her as its rightful wielder. The Void Stalker, momentarily stunned by the intensity of the core's light, stepped back. Their crimson visor flickered as if the energy was disrupting their systems. But Liara knew the reprieve would be brief. The Void Stalker was a hunter, and hunters did not falter for long. Kel groaned from where he lay on the ground, his armor scorched and his weapon broken. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him. "Liara," he rasped, his voice strained. "You have to finish it. You're the only one who can." Liara's gaze shifted to him, then to the Void Stalker, who was already regaining their composure. Her mind raced. The Starfire core had the power to end the war, to obliterate the fleets of the enemy, to save her people. But it came at a cost that Ethan had warned her about. The energy it unleashed would consume everything in its path, including the fragile remains of her world. "There has to be another way," she whispered, her voice trembling. The Void Stalker spoke for the first time, their voice cold and mechanical. "There is no other way, Princess. Release the core's power and fulfill your destiny, or fall to me, and I will use it myself." Liara's grip on the core tightened. She had lost so much: her family, her home, and Ethan. The weight of their sacrifices bore down on her, threatening to crush her resolve. But Ethan's words echoed in her mind. "You're the only one who can end this. Don't let them win." "I won't let you take this," she said, her voice firm despite the tears welling in her eyes. The Void Stalker tilted their head, as though amused. "Then you will die." They charged, their blades slicing through the air with lethal precision. Liara closed her eyes, focusing on the core's energy. She felt its warmth envelop her, a surge of strength and clarity filling her body. When she opened her eyes, they glowed with the same radiant light as the core. The Void Stalker's blade stopped inches from her face, halted by an invisible barrier of energy. Liara stared into their visor, her expression unyielding. "Not today." With a sweep of her hand, she unleashed a wave of energy that sent the Void Stalker hurtling backward. They crashed into the far wall, their armor sparking and hissing. Liara stepped forward, her movements graceful and deliberate, as though the core itself was guiding her. Kel watched in awe as Liara ascended to the heart of the chamber, her figure bathed in light. "Liara, what are you doing?" he called out, his voice laced with both fear and hope. She turned to him, her glowing eyes filled with a calm determination. "I'm choosing." Kel's breath caught in his throat. "You can't use it here. The blast will." "I know," she interrupted gently, "but I won't destroy my people's future just to win this war. There's a better way." Liara reached deep into the core, her mind connecting with its vast network of energy. It showed her visions of her ancestors who had wielded the core before her, of the lives lost in the war, of the delicate balance of the universe. And then she saw Ethan, his steady gaze and resolute smile. His voice echoed in her mind. "You're stronger than you think, Princess. Trust yourself." She understood now. The core was not just a weapon. It was a tool of creation and destruction. Its power could be shaped, but only by someone willing to bear its burden. Lyra took a deep breath and began to focus, channeling the core's energy not into destruction, but into a protective barrier, a shield that would neutralize the enemy forces without annihilating everything in its path. The Voidstalker rose to their feet, their movements sluggish but determined. They activated a device on their wrist, summoning reinforcements. Drones and enemy soldiers poured into the chamber, their weapons trained on Lyra. Kale struggled to his feet, grabbing a broken blade. "Stay away from her," he roared, charging at the nearest soldier. His movements were clumsy, but his determination was unshakable. Lyra didn't flinch. The core's energy surged around her, forming a dome of light that expanded outward. The enemy's weapons disintegrated in their hands, their drones collapsing midair. The Voidstalker's armor cracked under the pressure, and for the first time, a hint of hesitation flickered in their stance. "This is for Ethan," Lyra said, her voice resonating with power. "For my people. For peace." The energy dome reached its peak, enveloping the entire battlefield in a blinding flash. When the light faded, the chamber was silent. The Voidstalker and their forces were gone, reduced to harmless particles of energy that dissipated into the air. The Starfire core dimmed, its energy spent, and Lyra collapsed to her knees. Kale stumbled to her side, his hands trembling. "Lyra, are you?" "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice weak but steady. "It's done." Tears streamed down her face as she thought of Ethan. He had believed in her when she doubted herself, had given everything so she could fulfill her destiny. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "I hope you can see this, wherever you are." Kale helped her to her feet, his gaze filled with a mix of admiration and sorrow. "You did it. You saved us." Lyra nodded, wiping her tears. "No, Kale. We all did. Together." As they stepped out of the vault, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. The world was still scared, but it was alive. And for the first time in years, Lyra felt a spark of hope. Ethan's sacrifice, her father's teachings, and the resilience of her people, they had all led to this moment, and she would honor them by rebuilding what had been lost. With the weight of the Starfire core now behind her, Lyra turned her face to the rising sun. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape, and she would not let their sacrifices be in vain.